Hello.
Oh, let there be light. Yeah.
Can you hear
myself?
Okay.
Hello.
I think we're
Very
all here.
quietly,
I feel like
but
I just was born.
Yeah. Can we turn it up? Can we turn it up a little bit?
Should we do like a take one?
Sing a little bit for you.
Oh,
Come on.
so good at my earphones. The rest of
Oh, that's
can't
good. I was
hear.
like,
That was beautiful.
drop a little harmony.
I didn't know we were going to have to say.
Hello and welcome. You are listening to Tell Dem, a brand new podcast talking all things contemporary culture by black and brown artists, produced by Tamasha Theatre Company and supported by the Two of Dem at Transmission Roundhouse. My name is Tobi Kyeremateng and I'm the host for season 1. On today's episode, I'm joined by multidisciplinary artist Jacob V Joyce, actor Cherrelle Skeete, and artist and essayist Faridzo. The level of talent in the room is almost overwhelming, so let's get straight into it. Hey everyone!
Hey.
Oh my god! How's everyone doing?
Oh gosh, it's been busy, but it's been good. Sun shining today. I'm happy about that.
It was. I went for a walk today, which was really nice.
Oh, what did you book?
I walked along the South Bank, but then I also forgot it was half term, so there were lots of kids.
It's horrible.
But that wasn't nice. It was a bit jarring. I was like, why are all these little kids out? And then I was like, oh, it's because they've got stuff to do now.
Yeah.
So that wasn't fun. But the weather was beautiful. And on the South Bank as well, I just feel like it's like the perfect time to like go for a walk.
Yeah, I always feel like I'm in like early noughties white people's film about love when I walk along the South Bank. And, like everything's really emotional and like.
I think it was probably one of the dreams to do, like when being in Birmingham and seeing pictures of the Thames, and it's like, yeah, I can't wait to sit at the Thames and journal.
Oh wow.
And journal.
And I have done that.
No, the London Tourist Board is really good at selling that bit of the city.
Yeah.
Because I feel similar.
I bought it, definitely.
So just catching up on things happening this week. If Beale Street could talk, there's chills in the room.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I haven't seen it yet, and I'm really sad.
I mean, it's beautiful in a way that it's also sad because I don't want to spoil it for people because I know you guys haven't watched it.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet.
Went to watch How to Survive a Plague. So it's about these guys from New York, white men who are HIV/AIDS activists who are fighting the government and supporting the community and kind of getting medication on the market that could be used so these people wouldn't die so quickly and that they would be able to survive with the condition. I think at the beginning, obviously you're like, okay, there's lots of white people, specifically white men in this film. So I had to very quickly within myself, I had to acknowledge, okay, this is their story. This is their story. So the moment that I acknowledged that that's what it was, then, and I would be seeing this story told through the eyes and through their prism, basically. So I was like, okay, I already know there's probably going to be no black or brown people in this, and probably no, anyone outside of being male in this film, or any women or trans women. So I predicted all of that at the very beginning, and I was right because it's from their perspective. These white gay men, a lot of them artists, I think film archivists, theatre makers, script writers. I'm assuming who were all able to have access to healthcare because they had medical insurance, and so the I can't remember the specific drug that they had access to that was actually causing people to go blind and deaf, and it was something that was just thrown at them that wasn't tested properly. So obviously each step that they're kind of making towards trying to fight this battle with the against the government and trying to raise awareness, it's like you're I'm telling you all the things that I appreciate. So you're seeing like the grassroots activism. There were actually, when they went to some of the grassroots activism where they're sat in like these rooms and they're talking about really kind of self-empowerment, they're trying to figure out ways, and groups of people have sat down and tried to put together their own medical journal, and they're literally becoming scientists. So I was like, okay, I can appreciate that, all of that stuff. I did see a few black and brown people in the room, but there was no
in the actual cinema.
in the actual in the film.
Right, okay.
You saw some people from the communities, a few, like you saw a few dotted around the room, but they weren't they might have spoken, but it was never caught on film. But I did see them kind of sitting there, and I just wondered what their experience was, if they ever felt heard in any of those meetings. So I think if you watch the film knowing that it's through the prism of these white men and what they were trying to do, and obviously everything that isn't said and the voices that aren't heard, you can kind of guess and understand that obviously their experience was a lot different, like the Black and Latino community from that would have been experiencing the AIDS epidemic as well, who probably didn't have access to medical care to even get access to this particular drug. Wouldn't even have a say or a voice in any of those kind of conversations. But I appreciated it, and it kind of made me ask the question of, there's different types of activism. And I think I always believe that the grassroots activism is always important. I feel like we are losing some of that because a lot of our activism is now online, which is really important. It's really, really important. But I feel like we also need to meet up in actual physical spaces as well. So you're seeing that, like, obviously this film it's in the 80s, isn't it? It's the 80s, yeah. So you're seeing that and you're like, yeah, that's really, really important to be in physical spaces as well, to be able to affect change.
Do you think there was any I get a bit annoyed trying to compare like US and UK politics and activism, because even though like the US is very prominent and very hyper visible, it's not the be all and end all of activism, and so it's a bit annoying like comparing the two. But for you, did it kind of spark anything that was like reminiscent of activism in the UK, or the fact that the people that were in this and made this lived in quite affluent areas in NYC, and obviously that translates to the voices that were shown and the fact that they had access to certain medical care and things like that. Was there anything that you thought was quite reminiscent of activism in the UK at all?
Well, in Birmingham, for example, there's always been those kind of grassroots projects. So, for example, like the Black Power movement that happened like from like 70s, 80s, and like even the new Black Panthers that started to arrange like probably towards like the early 2000s. They kind of try to it's something, it's like an age old thing. People get together, they make their personal issues political, and that's something that has been the fuel for like even women's liberation movement. It's making the personal political. So that isn't a concept that is new, but I think it's something that as a younger generation, I think we have to kind of get back to. So that's why even just us being here and talking about these things, I think it's really important. It's really nice.
I think what I thought, because I saw that film when it came out in 2012. So I come from a country where we have quite high HIV rates. And I feel like growing up as a kid, what I knew about HIV was like how it had affected like people in my family, or you had all of these like Live Aid singles that would come out all the time. And it would always be like Black Africans that had HIV. Like that's how, when I was a kid, that's how the disease is sort of like it's weird to say how like you sell
it was framed that way.
Yeah. It was much more towards like, oh, this is like an epidemic in Africa.
It's an African thing.
Than it was like, this is a thing that's affecting like white gay communities in America. But that film was the first time that I'd ever seen any kind of media around HIV and AIDS that had framed it as human.
Right.
And for me, like being in England, and with all the things that I'd seen on HIV that were like a lot more towards Black people, a lot more towards African people, but looking at them as if like this is a problem that the West now has to fix. Like, you guys have got yourself into this mess. Why aren't you doing like all of these prevention things that we keep telling you to do? Which is like horrible to witness, especially when you know how that affects like real lives and real people. And I remember watching that film and thinking like, could it ever be possible to make a film like this for all of the sufferers in like
that didn't have
countries
a voice,
that have this high epidemic, or their communities here, like people that have are ethnically from these countries but are living here now, if we'd ever be willing to see a film that humanized that demographic like that. But that's not to take away, I think, everything you said about it, is that it's when you look at it as like, okay, but this is their experience, and that's still, you still need to bear witness to that experience too, because it was like a horrific epidemic at that time.
I think that's why I had to start with that, because straight away I could spend from beginning to end just tearing it down, like, why was this person not represented, why is that person represented? And I think it's this thing of like, there's this like major fear of the fact that, you know, we're talking about the D word, the diversity word. So, you know, people are stepping up, and people's stories, whose stories aren't usually told. It's just that the white man's story is always told. We always get to hear his story. It's not to say it's not valid. It's just that there are other stories that need to be told. And it's like, okay, cool. But especially, yeah, we talked about the fact that inserts of like, you know, we saw these white men who were fighting and pushing and, you know, really challenging the government, and then the inserts of like seeing burials with the statistics, which were usually from Africa and parts of Asia as well. So
That's
you saw,
very
which was really,
interesting.
really, it felt almost like subliminal. And I don't know if anyone...
Because it's
anyone
like
else
if you're spending a
noticed
whole
it?
film humanizing like these white men that are there to tell their story,
Yeah.
and then the only evidence you have of like people that aren't white having this disease is after they've passed away.
Yeah, that's when you notice.
To me, it seems like, I didn't see the film, but it kind of feels like once you start to allow people from the global south, like people from Africa, people from Asia, Black Americans even, to speak, the story is instantly way more, the story instantly becomes about a lot of other things as well as the AIDS crisis.
That's
So
it.
it's like, oh well, why do these people not have the resources to have medical attention? Oh, I see, right, because of institutionalized systemic racism in the States, and because of colonialism in Asia and in Africa. And that's a bit of an uncomfortable story for people to tell. And the people who fund these films, you know, it starts to become a little bit too personal.
Yeah.
Like, whereas you make a film about white people being great, and that fits into the, you know, helping each other to survive and coming together, and that's the American narrative that people are familiar with and that will be funded. But a story about Black people in the States surviving the AIDS crisis can not. There's no way for that story not to be about Black people surviving white supremacy in the United States as well, because those are the reasons why they're poor, because of the reasons why they got there, the reasons why they were ghettoized, the reasons why they're stopped from getting medical, insurance, all these kind of financial things that are imbalanced. So, yeah, that's what it seems like to me.
It's like that thing, like I'm always like, if I walk into a company, if I'm working, you know, in a theatre job, and there's something that I know, and, you know, I'm the only Black person or person of colour in the room, and I notice something, it's like I have to go do this conversation in my head. I'm like, is it worth bringing up Cherrelle? Because no one else is going to notice it. Is it a big deal? It's like the moment you want to talk about race, it's always uncomfortable and it's heavy. And, you know, with the way this film was told, obviously horrific images and, you know, really awful, but it's an easier story to tell.
It's because like Blackness is like seen as a genre in itself. So it's like, well, I thought this was a film about the AIDS crisis. We can't make it about black people. Like Black people are not affected by those things as well in so many different ways.
That's another thing as well, is that we talk about Africa as if it's like a universal
just
place,
one
but
country.
different countries have, like my country in particular, we do suffer from quite high HIV rates, but there are other countries in Africa that don't. It's not like a universal thing, but that's like that. But for me, it was sold to me as like an African disease or like an African problem. And then just even being a Black person, whatever like ethnicity or nationality you are, it sort of became like something that I felt had to be about me too. When I was a kid, that's how I saw victims of HIV to look. And I think that's to do with the UK as well. I didn't personally feel like I grew up hearing a lot about the AIDS crisis in England.
No, I definitely didn't actually either. And it's funny because, yeah, I know the AIDS activists that I know about are all either from America or Africa, and not many from Africa. I'd love to know more about different people. But I was going to say, like, the person that comes to mind is Simon Nicoli from South Africa. And he he wasn't just a HIV activist, he was also an anti-apartheid activist. So even to tell his story, you'd have to deal with the story of colonization of Africa. So it's like, it feels like it's not a coincidence that these narratives aren't told. It's because they're uncomfortable. And I think maybe the reason why we don't hear about English and AIDS activists in the UK is because it's more convenient to frame it as something that's happening somewhere else.
Off the back of kind of talking about that documentary and the making of it, I want to talk more, I guess, about being a Black queer artist, and I guess what that means in regards to like the work that's being made, or the resources that are being distributed and who they're being distributed to. But I know there was a wider thing that happened this month where the Black and brown colours were added to the LGBTQIA plus flag, and that sparked a whole conversation. I couldn't tell whether it was UK based or US based, because I was all watching it on Twitter and they all just kind of merged into one. But that kind of sparked a whole thing just about like history, and some people feeling like that history was being erased by the inclusion of these people, and Black and brown queer people being like, actually we don't feel included at all in this movement, and that's why it's important for us to be represented in this wider flag.
What do the Black and brown colours represent? And is it just
Black and brown people?
That's what it represents?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
That was it, pretty
I don't know
much.
if I like that. It's a bit basic. Can't we be like gold or
But
like
it's
turquoise?
also just like, why is that an addition to the other colours? Like, surely the point is the flag should be inclusive of all in the first place. If it's like, cool, we have this colour means this and this colour means that, and then the Black and brown people, it still feels like there's division there.
It's like, what? So the white people are like green, purple, yellow, like all these colours, and we're just black and brown. Like, can't we? Because I thought it was made so that I'm sure someone said that like the purple represents like magic and the green represents like, I'm just guessing, but like stuff like nature. Or, like there was actually, when they made it, they said that it represented all these things like sensuality, sexuality, blah 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 blah. So why do Black and brown people have to we're just like excluded from all that shit?
Well, it probably did mean things that when it was originally made, but so did so many things. You know what I mean? Like carnival meant something completely different to what it
blackness.
means. Yeah, and then it was sort of like, oh, actually, we're gonna go and kind of use it as this narrative. And I think it was a kind of US-wide thing where people were sort of like, actually, I don't feel like my history as a Black or brown queer person are represented in the things that you keep talking about.
I don't know about the flag. I have to say, I can't tell if it's Black people being extra, then I'm here for it. Do you know what I mean? If it's just like, if someone's just like, and we want 2 extra colours in the flag. Just because, like, does it even look pretty? Doesn't matter. Put those colours in the flag. If it's Black people being extra good, yes, we deserve all of the colours, everything.
I feel like, I definitely agree with what you're saying. Like, all the colours represent everyone, but I think in an ideal world, racism doesn't exist. All of these things doesn't exist, but it does exist. And I think by putting the Black and brown there, it's almost like, I feel as though it is reactionary, but it's reacting to the fact that we have to say that there is racism in the queer community. And I think even being in a queer space, a queer theatre space, a queer art space, like, even if you like, somehow I ended up going to I won't say the name of the night, but I went to a queer night because I just saw the name of the type of music and I assumed that it would be a space where I'd see people of colour there. And I turned up and I think myself and 2 other Black people were there, and it was literally just white, many lesbian women listening to this particular type of music. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And I think from what I can see is that there really is a divide in terms of race, hence why we have other nights that,
Don't say the name of those other nights.
I'm not going to say the name
the white
of
people
the other nights that one might go to. That's why I'm talking slowly.
There are no other nights.
No.
Black queer people don't do anything. We're not doing anything.
So, and I think, listen, I'm here for the extraness all day, every day.
Oh, me too. But Well, I've you know, if people can say it's a queer night and say like, oh, you know, people will just take whatever they want and then just slap it over something, and it might not mean anything. Is what I'm worried about. I'm seeing rainbow police cars. I'm seeing rainbow cash machines. I'm seeing Barclays Bank and the Army and the Conservatives marching in pride, and the rainbow starts to mean very little to me in terms of like anything. Black people can do what they like with the rainbow, and I'll be here for it. But I want to see the way that the rainbow is used.
Yeah.
I'd like it to be used in a less garbage way.
I always wonder how that would start though, because of what you're saying with how overused this flag has become, and like people selling what was it, Manchester Pride? It was like £75 tickets or something just to go to Manchester Pride, and like you see it on alcohols, you see it on banks. Like all of these people are using like this flag to sell things. Like that's what it's become. And what would be the first step of dismantling that structure, so it's not actually about like big brands trying to sell LGBT people things, and become more about, you know, what it represented in the first place. And I think maybe changing what the flag looks like could do that. It strips away how it's been used before, because that doesn't exist anymore. That's not a symbol that you can use in that way anymore, because now it's got these two extra colours.
We're more than the colour of our skin.
Yeah.
But I do agree with what you're saying, in that maybe it can be used as an opportunity to rethink what the flag means. If there's an opportunity for us to stop and be like, you know, to make a conversation around it, and that could be a way to segue into, and actually while we're at it, let's not put it on police cars while the police are doing what they're doing to black queer people, and let's not put it on banks when like LGBTQIA liberation is very much tied to a struggle against capitalism. You know, if it can be used as a segue into like having a conversation about what the flag means, then that's great. But my fear is that it won't be.
I don't particularly feel that that's a big concern for queer, black and brown people anyway. Like if we're gonna be doing activism, I feel like
there are other things.
Who is that invested in
Right.
flag politics, really, when there's so many other things that intersect that become far more pressing, surely. But I don't know though, because obviously it's got to this part that they've changed the flag, so someone must have been making noise about it.
Maybe that's what I'm worried about.
And who has the authority to change the flag?
The king of the gays. I hereby decree that the rainbow will who said that? Who owns the rainbow?
It must be
McDonald.
Kind of slightly backtracking to the queer night scene and the names you try to avoid. I think there is a wider conversation with that about like the co-opting of spaces made by queer people of colour. I have also been to a few queer nights and been like, oh, this is quite interesting. But that's the thing, and I think it's a thing in those spaces, but I think it's also a wider thing artistically. And I know you're all artists, so you all make art in different ways. It'll be good to talk more about, I guess, the co-opting of those spaces, but also just making work as a queer black artist, and if you think that inherently has to be activist led, or if it inherently has those qualities to it.
Have you heard the Gil Scott-Heron song Whitey on the Moon? It's like he's saying like, a rat done bit my sister nail, but Whitey's on the moon, and now her arm begins to swell, but Whitey's on the moon, and I can't pay my water bill, but Whitey's on the moon. I keep listening to that song, and I just think that all white artists, not all of them, but most of them, live on the moon, and they're just making work that's so removed from planet Earth. And I think it like applies to academics as well. I think people are so used to knowing about all of their white artists that they learn about in art school, and all their white theatre makers that they learn about in drama school, and all of their white academics that they read about in the canon, that they think that everything that they know is like the earth. They think they're on the earth, and they kind of use that to make work about things that for a lot of people just seem what relevance does this have to my life? And I just think I see a lot of white performance artists, and I'm just like, what is the purpose of this? I don't understand it. It's like these buckets of water that I'm like dripping sweat into represent the time at my grandmother's house when the roof caved in. It's like, I don't care, and I don't know what you're talking about. Why would anyone care about this? And it's bad because I have such a low expectation from white performance art that the bar is so low that I can be quite easily impressed. Because I'm like, oh wow, this is actually about something. And I see so much black queer performance art, and I'm like, you're pulling my guts out of me. This is so real. Like the things that you're talking about and things that you're dealing with are like so prescient and powerful, and even artwork that is like resisting politics and resisting activism. Just to see people taking up that space, I find it really empowering. But that's my opinion. Sorry it's so critical.
Apologise.
I'm not sorry. Do better,
There
white artists. Get off the bloody moon. Take off your astronaut helmet. Get back in your spaceship. Come to planet Earth. I don't want to watch your random performance about bloody nothing. But yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to go straight in with such a critical vibe. Like, I'm sure there's loads of great stuff. I'm a Virgo. I'm very like, just pessimistic.
Oh, Virgo's pessimistic.
Yeah, because it's the sign.
They say that practical.
Practical, yeah, but you're born just before the end of summer, so you know everything's about to be awful. That's why
that's
if you
sad.
think about all the star signs, that's their mood, kind of like, or what they represent.
But the thing is, that only works in the context of like our season, whereas I think
true.
universally, Leos are all like this. But I don't know. I need to do more research. Because I think that too, because I always thought like Scorpios have such an autumn energy about them. But if you live somewhere where the autumn's the summer, like you're going to be a summer baby. Or like you're going to be like, because Leos are overexcited because we're in summer.
But Scorpio is the time when everything dies, so they're hardcore.
Wow.
They are. All Scorpios
I
are
didn't
just
want
like...
to go there, but you said it, not me.
No, it's true. No, I love Scorpios. Some of my best mates are Scorpios, and they're all hardcore, like, because they're born in the worst time of the year.
So I saw a meme that I felt really offended by.
I know, they always come for us,
But it
man.
was like, it was saying like, oh, Leos always like want to go out with like unattractive friends so that they look the best, which is not true, because Leos want everyone they're with to be their best selves.
That's
so that we
it.
all collectively look good together.
And we feel good. They want people
Right?
to feel good.
I've heard that. I saw a meme that was like, if Virgos unclench their buttholes for just a second, their whole existence will just fall out onto the floor or something like that. Have you seen the one with the old women? It's just pictures of old women, and it's just like your star sign. I think if you just Google old women star signs. Like, I know, I can't remember all of them. I think it's old women with swords or like big knives. I don't know, they all have like serious energies about them, all these old women.
I was thinking about my I think more the fact that the obstacles that I think I've faced has more been focused around my class. I think being working class and not being originally from London, it means it's like there's this constant pull where like I could end up back in Birmingham, where it's harder to be black and queer in Birmingham than it is in London. There are spaces here. It's like saturated. So many events that you can go to. So many spaces where you feel as though that you're catered for. Obviously, there's the space that you might end up and you're like, whoa, this isn't what I expected. But you know that there is a space for you. You know that you could go on Facebook and find an event in a few days that you can go to. In Birmingham, it isn't that, like, you know, it's great seeing more events that are happening now that are focused towards queer POCs who are wanting to come together and make art and having spaces to collaborate and finding, you know, there's more of that happening. I think within theatre, the biggest queer voice that you're going to hear is we are white gay men, which is probably the same across a lot of like art platforms. So that can be, I think I made a clear decision with myself at the end of last year. I was like, every space that I go into, I want to bring all of me. And I have to outwardly say that, because sometimes, you know, we're constantly code switching, you know, and you're like, oh, I can't say that because that person might be offended, or I can't say that. And, you know, you'll be in a queer space where you're the minority in terms of race, and then you might be in a space where like everyone's down with like knowing their queer history, you know, you're like, oh, I don't know any stuff about, like, I don't know that James Baldwin quote, and I don't know that essay from Audre Lorde. So you're constantly feeling like, oh, I'm not enough of anything. It's like, well, actually, it's just like this is who I am, and all of these aspects. These, we're all multifaceted in I don't know if I'm making much sense.
You make so much sense. And
do you know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying, and actually, maybe that's why maybe that's the reason why the quality of work from Black queer people is often so much better, because
so
especially
layered,
working class Black queer people, because we've had to code switch our entire lives. And when I was about 15 or like around this kind of age, speaking to one of my friends who was like a middle class white boy, and then like turning, because it was in the same room as my friend who's like working class person who lived on my road, who's a woman of color, and my voice just completely switched, and I was like, what? I just went from talking like this to talking like that just as I turned my head. Why did I just completely change my persona? And I think if you're like Black, queer, working class, you're probably already a performance artist by the time you've finished puberty. Not to mention the fact that you've had to consider navigating so many different types of complicated and uncomfortable situations that I suppose white people, just by virtue of being white, wouldn't have to think about those things in most instances. Maybe they would in some, but yeah, maybe it's
feeling strongly enough there is no choice but to share this story, to put that experience out there, because otherwise you'll implode.
Exactly. And also the expectation to perform, I think. Like, I think if people, I grew up in London, but I went to uni in Brighton. And I think going into spaces that are super white, like, if you're encountering people who've not been around Black people before, there's almost an expectation for you to perform something. It's like, and it may be as small as like people asking you to talk about where you grew up, or it might be like, I hate that we always have to go back to this issue, but I do think it encompasses so many bigger things of just like the thing of someone touching your hair.
Oh my gosh.
It's like your presence is something bizarre and strange. It's already like, ooh, what's this?
That it's such a big thing that comes up, the hair thing. It's a small big thing, and it's an anxiety that myself and a few other like Black actresses that I know, like, we'll have our hair in a head wrap for the first few weeks of rehearsals, because you don't want to have that awkward conversation or like with that person. The moment they see your hair, it's like they literally can't deal. They literally cannot deal. Like, they're like in a trance. And it's usually at times when you're feeling very hyper visible, especially in those kind of spaces and certain institutions as well, where you almost feel like, I should feel thankful for this job because there's no one else that looks like me walking down these corridors. So, it kind of becomes, do I call out this person in this moment? Yeah, obviously you have to have a conversation with them, but again, you naturally have to deal with the fragility of that person and that person's well-being, because you're so hyper visible, because you're the only one.
And sometimes you don't have the energy to do it.
And you don't have the energy, so that's why you put on a head wrap and you're like, I want to deal with this like a few weeks later on, and then I can.
I can imagine people who've not had that experience being like, oh, Black people always talk about this issue with the hair, but it's like, it's a metaphor for so many other things that are happening. And it's like,
it's like my DNA just comes alive. Like, I don't know, like my great grandmother was like inspected in that way, and it just like makes my DNA come alive. Like, what is this? To just put your hands on someone without any consent. Like, what the hell?
But just treat them as if they're like something for your entertainment or comfort or leisure, like the same way you would like go up to a sofa and be like, oh, this sofa's very soft. What kind of leather is it? Or like, oh, I like this feathery hat you're wearing. It's like you would do that to an item, an object, but you wouldn't do it to a person. And
I'm interested, like what you said about noticing a situation where you were behaving as two different people, two different people. Because I feel like I struggle with this a lot too, and being different people in different situations, but I always wonder, why is it that I feel like I have to meet those other people where they are? It's difficult to explain, because it's like a really strange phenomenon that I think everyone experiences in some way. I mean, I come from families that are two different cultural backgrounds completely, and I'm one way with one family and another way with another family that's like reflective of who they are as people. And when you're divided in that way from like the first instance, when you have all of these like different identities or intersecting identities or whatever, like how do you know which is the one that's I don't know,
That's
the
most
center,
that all of you.
and
That's-
like, and how
yeah.
do you become that person?
Mm.
Like I don't think, not to say how do you stop code switching, because I think code switching is like a tool of survival and it's like a useful thing to do, but how do you work out how to let other people meet you in your space rather than always having to try and fit into your own boxes and other people's spaces, I guess.
I think I'm definitely doing the same thing as you in terms of bringing my whole self. And I think that was when I was 15. I'm sure I probably do code switch, and I definitely do code switch in subtle ways, I think, you know, because I don't know, work with lots of different people, and I think I can't always bring my whole self. If I'm like working with a group of like elderly Caribbean people, I'm not gonna be like as free with my like femininity as I would be if I was like, you know, working with a bunch of queer people, even though I know that there are queer people in elderly Caribbean communities. And I think after a little while I would start to be myself. But I think initially I would try to just meet people where they're at and take into account like cultural norms. But I do think growing up for me is literally what you just said, just trying to bring my full self to every situation.
I feel like I had quite an interesting thing recently with a short story that I wrote. That one, it didn't win anything. Wow, it's really gonna lie. It got shortlisted. It got shortlisted for the Guardian Fourth Estate Bain Prize, which was quite a big deal.
Yeah, that's wicked. Congrats.
Thank you. But the story was like very much based on me as a kid, but it's about this girl. Well, I read her as a girl because it was based on me, and that's how I identify. But she goes through a lot of issues with her race because she's a black girl in a white family, and she has like really she suffers a lot of gender dysphoria because she's going through puberty and she doesn't like how her body changes. She's a lot more comfortable being seen as like as just a kid, like a sort of genderless being, and she starts getting obsessed with the idea that she's a changeling because there's all this like local myth in the area about changelings. So she gets told, if you go to this particular spot at this particular time when a comet passes over, you'll get returns to your home family. And she's like, cool, because like I don't fit in with anybody here. There's no one that seems to struggle in these ways I do, so I must be not of here. And for me, that story was like really written with the intention to tell this story about like English folklore. It wasn't really about the identity at all. The identity was just because it was like what I know, or like not necessarily what I know, but what I had taken as a starting point from my own life. And a lot of the response to it was like, oh, but this is a story about identity. This is a story about, and like just putting labels on like this child. It made me think about how people actually consume like any kind of art that touches on identities at all, and how we look at art to be like, okay, so what story is being told here? What is the identity that's being addressed here, and what can we say about that, about its representation, or what can we learn from it, or what can we, all of these things.
When things are intentionally vague, part of their strength is that they speak to a number of different experiences. I recently did a project that lasted about 4 years. I don't know if it's still going, called Grounder, where I made a avatar on the app Grindr that was an alien, a non-binary alien cruising for intelligent life. And I had lots of conversations with different people and turned the conversations into a comic book with the people's consent. So I didn't use their image, I just cut their words out and made them into speech bubbles for characters. And then I'd project those comic books and then perform it with music. What I was trying to do with that is remove gender and race. So you don't know if someone says, oh, I'm not from here, or like, where are you from? Or I don't really feel like I belong in this place. Then you don't know if they're talking about race or gender or sexuality. And that's what I was trying to aim for, because I really like stories like that. I think your story that you wrote sounds awesome. It doesn't sound like a necessarily negative thing that people were seeing other things.
No, I definitely don't see it as a negative. I think it was just interesting for me as a writer, writing something that was like so familiar to me as an experience, for then other people to put labels on it that maybe they'd used for their experience, or the stuff that they related on it, which were like things that I had never thought of to use. My friend that was at Reddit, who works in publishing, he was one of the first people that I think I sent it to and that shared it. And he's a trans guy, and he said, oh, your character's trans, right? And for me, I was like, I mean, it's a child, so I don't know what this character is, but I know that the character that I wrote was based on me, and I'm not trans, so we can take from that what we will. But obviously, if you're a trans guy reading something in it that you see as familiar and you're using that label, then that's also not wrong. And it's interesting how we use definitions and we use labels in different ways for stuff that's actually, I think everyone can find a bit of their own experience in their own ways.
Yeah, because I feel like what your friend saw in the book, like you're saying everyone goes through this period of time when they want to change. Yeah, you're tapping into something, a bigger narrative than the one that, you know, it's not just your story anymore. Once you make a story and you put it out there, it becomes everybody's.
I was going to say, yeah, based on that, my favourite playwright whilst I was at college in Brum was Lorraine Hansberry. Fast forward, so whilst I was going through drama school, read Raising the Sun, fell in love with it. That's when I first met Noma, and I was like, oh my gosh, she's amazing. Saw her on stage in Coventry. Fast forward, got into drama school, and then realising that she's queer, and that you know, that she was her and Nina Simone are close friends, and then I'm like seeing the Maya Angelou and then James Baldwin, and there's like collective of, you know, artists, queer artists in, you know, around that time who were creating art and supporting and critiquing each other's art. Being a queer black actress, I realised going through the institution of drama school and having a really, really amazing time, but also very, very challenging and difficult time, being angry pretty much every single day. And then once I was able to find the emotional vocabulary to be able to express my experience, that's when I started to find other black actresses who had similar experiences. And that's kind of how Blacktress was. Well, it started off as a network and support group for black women, from an African-centred space for black women actors. And yeah, started as meetups and stuff. And we have like workshops which are black women led. And it's about kind of stepping into leadership. And there's a lot of internalized misogyny, internalized racism that black women, I mean, all of us experience, but I'll kind of, because it was from my own experience and how I identified. So kind of coming together and being able to really kind of put a magnifying glass over those internalized things that we've experienced just from living in this part of the world, you know. And then on top of that, that's before you even get to create art. So you imagine you've got these people that are then going into spaces where they feel as though they have to fit into this particular mold, you know, they're acting before they even play in a character. Another actress who's older, and she talked about the fact that, you know, when she was coming up as an actress, it was cool to be Jamaican, and she's Nigerian. So she created her own version of a Jamaican accent in order to fit in. And
amongst other actors.
Yeah, because around that time it was people that the black actors around that time were predominantly from the Caribbean, and she says the Nigerian actors were a minority, so it's like everyone assumed that everyone was Jamaican. So she said that she would always try and fit in by saying certain things, and, you know, and then also talking about how your voice changes once you go through drama school, and then going back home and feeling as though you don't fit in because you sound more too white, you know, too clipped, because you have a training that kind of, you know. And then even for me, like being able to be like, okay, I really want to hold on to my accent, because again, feeling stateless and feeling like, oh.
But then you think all of these things, it's like just going through all of that, it's like turning up, as you said before, like turning up in a room as your full self. Like there's so much more to carry as if this is what you have to go through, just to keep that as you. Like if I'm thinking about like if you've gone through the same paths, but you're like just like a white middle class actor from London, all of those bits where you get stunted, or where you're like the elders have been stunted, all of that history is like just not there for you. You just kind of, you're just present. You don't have to think about what being present means. You don't have to think about, okay, well, how do I make sure to hold on to my accent when I'm working in an industry that's trying to get rid of my accent? And how do I go back home and show back home that
I'm still down.
I'm still down, even though I've come with all this other stuff that I'm bringing. Like, there's just a lot more to take around with you, which is...
Yeah.
I think blackness is such a weird thing. Like, it's been formed, you know, not trying to plug my work again, but because it's not for everybody. But I'm doing a residency at the moment at Gasworks, and it's a residency specifically working with African, Caribbean, LGBTQ migrants and asylum seekers and refugees. And like when I got the job, they said, yeah, we're looking for an artist to work with migrants. And I said, well, yeah, okay, that's fine. But what does the word migrant mean? Because someone who's like white Italian or like white French or something is not treated the same way that a black British person is treated. Because if you're coming over from Italy or coming over from Spain or coming over from France, people aren't going to look at you like you don't belong here.
Even if you're speaking your native language, if you're speaking Spanish, Italian, you know, it's not kind of seen as like a get out of my country kind of thing.
Acceptable other.
Exactly. But people will look at you like, how did you get in here? Do you know what I mean? Even if you're third generation black in certain instances, and you'll definitely be asked the question, where are you from? Meaning, So I said to Gasworks, like, I really would like to do this residency, but I'd like to kind of challenge this idea of what a migrant is and work with all black queer people, including black British people, because I think that like all the black people in this country anyway exist as part of a global black diasporic community that has been created as a result of displacement, economic destabilization, and abduction in many cases. So it's like, I don't really care if somebody is like, you know, third generation Jamaican, because I still think they need art. Blackness is a weird thing. It does exist in its own kind of, you know, thing where I do think people are just connected to it by virtue of being black, because we share a very strange set of global histories in terms of displacement.
As a kind of closing thing, if there's one piece of advice you could give someone listening right now, what would that be?
Be patient with yourself.
It's scary, but attempt to bring your whole self, and even acknowledge and notice the parts of yourself that you hide, because those are probably the areas that you need to work on, and face your own truth, if that makes sense.
Wow, just dragged me. That was
if those are the bits that you're hiding, those are the bits that you need to face. Yeah, it's hard, boy.
But I also think, don't blame yourself if you can't bring your full self to all areas, because I think there's also a lot of pressure to be like declare all your identities and be like, this is me and da-da-da. And sometimes you like, well, I know for myself personally, like you need time to sit on it and be like, okay, what is this all about? who am I? Oh my God.
Who am I? Yeah, it is that. It's
doing
existential.
Existential crisis on a podcast. Please also listen. That's hilarious.
Earlier, Cherrelle reviewed How to Survive a Plague, a screening and talk put together by Queer Cinema Club. They are a community organisation focused on celebrating prominent queer stories made for the screen. Their mission is to provide access to content that represents the entire LGBTQIA+ umbrella, as well as create a space for members of the community to gather, socialise and support one another. If you enjoyed listening today, join in the convo by hashtagging #TellDem on Twitter. Let us know what you liked, and if you hated it, share the link with your ex. I've been Tobi.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
I've been Tobi Kyeremateng. You've been lit. Thank you for listening to Tell Them.
Yeah. Reach out to me.